Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, it is the quarterback episode. We're doing it. Love it. No interview today, but we are drafting quarterbacks for 2024, and then we're going to do Pitch Me SEC quarterbacks for 2024. We want to know who our official SEC quarterback of the Saturday Down South podcast will be for 2024. Well, how are we feeling? We started this by arguing about a quarterback off air. So I feel like we're just in we're in like mid-pod form already.
Yes. I love this. Yes. It's silly season, as Steve Spurrier once called it. It's the time to kind of pick and get married to your takes. And one cool thing about us is we'll jokingly stick to our takes, but we will kind of pivot. And this quarterback crop is interesting because as we've been talking about, there's not really your guy. Again, Carson Beck's a great player. I'm not dumping on him, but there's no Trevor Lawrence type guy coming back.
We tipping picks. Let's
No. I just don't want Georgia fans in my mentions. Okay, I'm just talking about returning starters because I know Georgia fans are going, our guys. I get it. But there's no returning Heisman winners. There's no returning national champions like we talked about. So it's a pretty wide open field. Is kind of where I was going there.
Is deep though. It is a
very deep field.
There are guys that will get left off. We're going to draft 5 quarterbacks apiece. This is the way this is going to work. We're going to draft 5 quarterbacks apiece. This doesn't necessarily need to be a draft of the most accomplished quarterbacks. You can take flyers on guys that you think are set up well. This is taking everything into account, okay? This isn't necessarily how we do it sometimes where we're like, oh, I'm starting over and this is the quarterback that I would want running my team. We are drafting quarterbacks for this upcoming season so that when we look back at the end of the season, at the end of 2024, we can say, I had the better draft or you had the better draft. So you can love a situation that a guy is in with maybe returning starters in the offensive line, his play caller, receivers, whatever. And you could also hate the situation a guy is in. And maybe that's going to prevent him from being draftable for you because this is, to me, all about trying to assemble the guys that you think are going to be best at this position in 2024. NFL draft stuff, I think for this argument is somewhat irrelevant. I don't really care as much about that. Like, for example, selecting Anthony Richardson before the 2022 season would have been like kind of an intriguing thing. There would have been probably some people that would have been like, all right, late round flyer, let me do something like that. And I get that he went number 4 overall, but he wasn't even one of the 6 or 7 best quarterbacks in the SEC that year. So it wouldn't have been, in my opinion, a good pick for the draft. Whereas if you had taken someone like Max Duggan for some crazy reason going into the 2022 season, even though that guy ends up being barely a draftable quarterback, he went to a national championship. He finished second in the Heisman voting and had a much, much better season than Anthony Richardson. So we're not necessarily being like, oh, we're just drafting the guys that we think are going to be the highest picks in the NFL or something like that. I realize we're kind of in draft mode right now. The way too early mocks are out. So that's a hot topic of conversation. I don't really care about draft as much today. Yeah, maybe some of the next level measurables are part of the evaluation, but we're trying to draft quarterbacks based on how we think they will be in college football in 2024. Does that all make sense?
I'm so glad you're not thinking about the draft already because I feel like obviously the draft did just happen. Everyone's like, next draft. And I'm like, guys, we have no idea. We have no idea. So let's just observe it and have fun and not be trying to be like, oh, this random guy's gonna go number 1 overall. But yeah, I'm glad we're pretty real about that. Where it's like, let's start thinking draft like in November. But I think that's a good time to do that.
I get into it a little bit. I do. I find it interesting.
It's interesting. Yeah.
I don't want to get too into the weeds and say that this guy is a lock and say that certain players, if they don't go in the top 10 picks, it'll be a great injustice. But yeah, I mean, I put out my 10 guys that I think are going to be first round picks from the SEC. I kind of make note of some of these things of, oh, maybe there was a guy who was kind of off my radar, who is, a lot of other people are high on, or I'm like looking at some of the numbers for Malachi Starks at the safety position. I'm going, you realize there's only been 3 first-round safeties in the 2020s, and there's been 5 first-round running backs in that same time? Like, maybe that's going to hurt him. I take note of these things, even as someone that is much more of a college football consumer, creator of content than NFL. But you're right.
You know who's the king of this, though? And here's where I'm going with this. Josh Allen, Wyoming. He was not a good quarterback in college. He was just not a good quarterback in college, and that's fine, okay? But all the draft boards had him so high that we're all locked in trying to watch him, dissect him. And there was just never a point he was a top 20 or top 50 quarterback in college football. But everyone was like, I see it. He's got the big arm. It's like, you're lying to yourself if you think that guy would be on any type of list. So that's exactly where it's just quarterback specific. Sometimes we get too enamored with the 6'5" guys, the guys that have the tools that the next guy's already looking at. And yeah, to your point about Anthony Richardson, it's like that guy would have been a fine pick because he played well, but he's been a different player in the NFL, and it's very rare to have a guy who's both.
Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to have drafted him going into that season with all the unknowns, and it wouldn't have been a good pick looking back on it. If you go back to one of the original episodes that Marlo and I did of this podcast, one of the very first episodes was me going off about people that were in love with Josh Allen. Like, if you go back in the archives, you can find that episode. It absolutely exists. And let's just say I was wrong. I was wrong. I was definitely wrong. Okay, draft, Will. Do you want first pick or second two?
You know I want second two, especially in this type of field.
That terrifies me. Terrifies me in many ways. But I will then take first pick. And with the first pick of the 2024 quarterbacks draft, I'm taking Carson Beck. You have to. You just have to. The guy checked every single box last year, perhaps outside of winning a national championship, winning an SEC championship, obviously. But would he have done it if Georgia had gotten into the playoff, if it had been a different year with different teams that were contending for those final spots? Yeah, I mean, I think that was very much on the table. That ultimately didn't happen. He's not as clutch as Stetson Bennett IV just yet. I don't know if anybody on this planet is as clutch as Stetson Bennett was as a college football player, but I love the player that he's become. Beck navigates the pocket so unbelievably well. He has grown to be a much more confident player than what we saw, I think, even early on last year, that South Carolina game that you were at, where he's kind of figuring out who he is as a quarterback week in, week out. And you saw that really grow, what he can do well, what he can turn to on third down, what he's going to do when it's money time. I would like to see him continue to progress with the deep ball. If he had that in his arsenal.
The deep ball.
I didn't say it like that, did I?
No, that's Leggett, bro.
Oh, okay. Leggett says that. All right. You slipped some of these one-liners past me. And I'm like, I don't know. No idea where you were going with that one. Leggett was, God, now you got me all flustered. Beck was, in my opinion, a guy that was one of the 5 best quarterbacks in all of college football last year. Yep. And you can make the case that he wasn't quite as good as his predecessor in certain spots, but the numbers were still remarkable. 8th in quarterback rating, completed 72% of his passes for 9.5 yards per attempt. That is crazy efficiency. The thing I loved about Bennett is what we saw from Beck last year too, against teams that finished ranked in the AP poll. The only guy with multiple games who finished with a better quarterback rating that just won the Heisman and went number 2 overall. A guy by the name of Jaden Daniels, you might have heard of him. Georgia, the best third down conversion percentage in the country, and tied with Oregon for the most red zone touchdowns in America. Beck did these things with his 2 top targets banged up for key chunks of last season, and how much that impacted him, I don't know, but at times you kind of forgot. And that's the testament of a guy that is super, super good at this. Look, I'm really high on this pass catching group. I've talked about it before. Dom Lovett could be Georgia's first 1,000-yard receiver since Terrence Edwards 2002. Dylan Bell, just the Swiss Army knife. Ra Thomas, Colby Young from Miami, London Humphrey showed promise at Vandy. You know all these things. We've talked about him. Oscar Delp, you get it. Plus, it's an offensive line that should be one of the nation's best. And here's the kicker. Another year of Mike Bobo, Will. Another year.
Which is a blessing system. This time around.
It's a blessing, not a curse. I'm willing to admit it. Beck has the highest floor. He has the clearest path to New York of any player in college football, which is why he and Quinn Ewers, I'm not trying to tip picks, but it's why he and Quinn Ewers are the preseason Heisman Trophy favorites. Beck, 1-1.
You know, after I said I wanted the first or the second 2 picks, I immediately regretted it because I do think Carson Beck is pretty much a 1-1, and this is one of the few that I was wrong because there is a clear 1, and then after that it gets dicey. So I actually think I helped you out here by giving you Carson Beck, but I didn't want to back off and be like, oh, because that's that's the bit. I committed to it. I'm not going back. But I agree with everything you just said. I think he's in a unique position where he has a returning offensive coordinator. He's surrounded by talent. They have, maybe keeping what you have is upgrading in the sense when you have the same offensive coordinator, when you're bringing in transfers like we were talking about that Georgia could have the leading the most receiving yards among transfers of anyone. Because even when you throw in like an ETN, when you throw in Delp, those guys are all transfers. So
Delp not a transfer. Delp not a transfer.
I thought he was in South Carolina.
No, never committed to South Carolina. Started his career at Georgia.
Oh, okay, got you. I imagine him as a South Carolina player. My bad. Good job.
But all of his pass catching options, we're talking about transfers. So we're talking about Dom Lovett, Ra Thomas, transfer, Colby Young, transfer, Dylan Bell, not a transfer, and then London Humphreys, transfer from Vandy. So and ETN, obviously.
Good cleanup there. I just remember there was like a controversy with that in some way, and I had like penciled him in as somebody that was just bumping around on that roster because there's a lot of those guys. But yeah, I think that's a pretty clear number one. So yeah, on to number two.
All right.
So you just mentioned him at the tail end there. I think it's a little bit of a safe pick. I'm going to go former Thick King Quinn Ewers here.
Like it was number 2 on my big board.
Yep. I think I got to start protecting myself a little bit more of these, take a little bit more of the consensus. I think that he's a guy who, he's the highest rated recruit of all time at quarterback. We talked about that last time when we kind of mentioned him. And part of that is, marrying all these things together, right? Marrying what Texas is now an asset, right? It used to be a liability. You had a good quarterback going to Texas. Yeah, it's going to sink his stock. Where's he going to end up, right? Now it's like, okay, you have Steve Sarkisian. You have great line play. You have guys coming to Texas to go win, it's always been about the city of Austin, which is a beautiful place, the money, the brand, with the connections, whatever. Now it's about I can go there and win, right? Which is ultimately, we talked about Alabama under Nick Saban kind of getting that Bama discount when it comes to guys will take you at your word, right? You might stay there a little bit longer and wait for your spot. You might participate in those positional battles that you wouldn't at other places. And so same deal here at Texas, that not only do they have the top end, the 5 stars that they've always gotten, but the depth, the way they've been able to maximize the couple of transfers they've had to turn those levers. I think for Ewers, the fact that he has shown that he is a classic college incumbent starter. He is a good leader. He has changed himself. He's changed his body. He's been in different, not necessarily exactly different systems, but different circumstances. He has been there for the entire ride of Texas, almost beating Alabama, the first time where he goes down, getting so close, finally breaking through, finally getting to the playoff. This year, from his standpoint, you get the expanded playoff. Maybe you win your first playoff game at Texas. So if he has a final season similar to our boy Ellinger, what I'm saying Texas is back at the end, it'll mean something totally different.
Very different. And would be so much more validated because it won't be coming on the heels of a 4-loss season.
Yep.
So something to be said for that. Quinn Ewers is the real deal. He's the real deal. And I don't know if that means real deal from a standpoint of number 1 overall pick or anything like that. I was reading Jordan Reed, I think today, had his first mock draft for ESPN, and he was saying how there was day 3 grades on Ewers. Some of those questions that we have about the downfield consistency, about being able to stay healthy, playing at kind of the right weight, figuring it out. In terms of a college player, though, he is the real deal. And I think everybody's going to look at what he did in that Alabama game and say, that's when you knew that this guy was special. I'll give you another example. That Big 12 championship game was set up for Texas puking on its shoes.
Yep.
It was in every way, because you're facing an Oklahoma State team that beat you last year, that's got nothing to lose, is playing like a different team down the stretch. They'd figured things out with Ollie Gordon the second, or Ollie Gordon the third. Am I blanking on which disciple he is?
3 of them.
Three of them. That's right. And this is a situation in which Texas, everybody knows what's on the line. You're trying to win your first Big 12 championship game since 2009. You're trying to be able to get to the playoff finally and avoid people laughing in your face. And what does Quinn Ewers do with that pressure on that stage? He goes out and plays the game of his life. The numbers that guy put up in the first half, it was over by halftime, Will. And the things that he did to say, no, I got this. This is a different Texas team. We have moved on. He was so dialed in. And to me, that was confirmation that this is a guy that's really getting it and he's really figuring things out. Yep. I love the situation he's set up for. You got 4 returning starters on that offensive line. I know it's a new look receiver room. You bring in Golden from Houston. You bring in Bond, the Iron Bowl hero, Nye Black, those guys. You feel like you're going to be put in good spots if you're receivers in a Steve Sarkisian offense. I love what he is coming back into, and I'm glad that he's coming back for the sake of college football. I think this is a very worthy number 2 overall pick in a quarterback draft.
Yes, and just to follow that up, very similar guy, Dylan Gabriel.
Okay. I had assumed, and this is going to sound like a hater take, and I'll get to it in a second here. I'll let you go off. I had assumed that you would end up with Dillon Gabriel, and it's not that I was particularly down on him. He was fifth on my board. That's my hint for you. He was fifth on my board, and I assumed he would not end up being my selection.
Right. We all have our guys that we like. Dillon Gabriel is one of those guys for me. Talking about a perfect situation, that's why, I love that you just highlighted that about Texas. He's a guy who has been around, right? So what is the perfect destination for him, right? Where's the Gus Survivor boot camp? The Atlantic, right? So this is a guy that Gus had him trying to be mobile, broke his collarbone, running around the bounce house at UCF. And he was just like, you know what? Why am I doing this? He went to Oklahoma, kind of mutual parting of ways there. Now he's at Oregon. He's proven that he can win at a high level, and that was kind of the criticism of him at UCF is in these big games, right? Now he's at Oregon. Who, like I said, is Gus rehab. They're starting to get more and more talent in, not just talent, but SEC style Dan Lanning trenches recruiting where these guys are getting bigger. They're getting kind of cockier. They're getting to where they're not this finesse team anymore. And Dillon Gabriel is one of the most confident players I've ever seen at the quarterback position. He is a guy that has been told at every stage of his career, coming out of Hawaii, 5'11", left-handed guy, oh, you don't have it. You're never going to be an NFL player. He starts at UCF because of Mackenzie Milton, right? Because that's another guy from Hawaii. Starts at UCF, goes, okay, I'm gonna be kind of the heir apparent here. Plays for Gus, just like Bo Nix turned him into a runner. Wasn't really his thing. Said, okay, now I'm going to prove I can kind of do more of this like Oklahoma, not spread, but like more of like a multiple offense. And then boom, now we're going to go to Oregon, play with all these resources, the best facilities maybe in college football, the ability to get this talent. So yeah, I think the fact that this is a veteran guy, 125 passing touchdowns in his career, nuts. That's with missing a year. Now you can talk about, the extra year of COVID, whatever, but point being, he's done it before. He's been a leader, even though, he's a guy who being, not like being in like a social room with him, but like being in games with him, seeing him on the sidelines, he isn't a guy who will ever struggle to be a leader. That's one thing about him. He will come into a locker room and immediately be that guy. And I think Oregon had that last year with Bo Nix, but he was a very different leader. He was that humble servant type of leader. Dillon Gabriel is, I'm going to beat you, laugh at you, tear you up, spit you out. And that's exactly what Oregon needs to legitimize itself in the new Big Ten.
It's weird to say, but there's a world in which this works out perfectly for both Oregon and Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
I think it will. I truly think it will. I think Oregon was the ideal landing spot. Couldn't have drawn up better for Dillon Gabriel. The things that he does well, the things that we talked about Bo Nix being able to do well, and Will Stein running that offense, they're going to scheme you open in ways that I'm not even sure Jeff Lebby was quite able to do at Oklahoma. Okay, like they what they did last year and the protection that Bo Nix got. I mean, there's a reason why people became so frustrated with his average depth of target, and they would say he's not attacking downfield, he's not doing this, he's not doing that. That scheme and having the protection that they did. They returned their starting tackles. There might not be a better receiving room in all of college football than the one that Dillon Gabriel is inheriting at Oregon, being able to have Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart coming over from A&M, a guy that we both love. And there is a situation for him that is just built to thrive. He's going to break, as long as he stays healthy, he will break Case Keenum's all-time FBS passing touchdowns record this year. He needs 31
That's
to break
a good
it.
stat. Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, and that felt – because he played for like 8 years. That felt unbreakable.
And it feels a little bit like, okay, well, he's benefiting from the COVID year. It's like, well, no, he's also had, his injuries.
Missed a year,
and stuff like that. So it's a little bit different. The only reason I wasn't going to personally take Dillon Gabriel until fifth overall, he's fifth on my board.
Mm-hmm.
The point that you brought up earlier about how I think there were moments in which you wondered, is this guy more of a scheme-dependent stat compiler than he is that dude at quarterback? And the first real moment where I felt myself changing that perspective was last year, Red River Shootout.
Yep.
The drive that he had at the end of that game, and you even go back and look at the touchdown pass that he had in the final minutes to Nick Anderson, where the pocket's collapsing, and you look like, man, that's the type of guy, where that's the type of spot where if you are not that guy, you're turtling.
Yep.
You're turtling, you're turning it over, you're not built for that moment. And instead, he comes up with the biggest play of his career. And it made me for the first time say, this guy has a little bit of that juice. He does deserve to be remembered as one of the better quarterbacks of the 14 playoff era. I think he will finish his career as just that. But he does kind of lack some of those moments right now. Will he get those moments at Oregon in a new conference, playing against Big Ten competition? It's going to be interesting because before that Texas game, Will, I went back and looked this up. He had 2 wins against ranked foes in his career before the Texas game. And it was against a Kansas team that ended up having a losing record in 2022 and an Oklahoma State team who lost 5 of its last 6. And Gabriel in that game didn't leave a scoring drive after the first quarter. Mm-hmm. So you could question that. But that Texas game, huge legacy game for Dillon Gabriel. He's a good pick, a number 3 overall. If he ends up having the most statistically prolific season of any of these guys, it won't necessarily be a surprise.
Yep, and I love that you keyed in on that average depth of target from Bo Nix last year, because one thing about Dillon Gabriel is he will sling that thing.
Yes, he will.
So it might be a Arizona State Jaden Daniels special, where it's like, is it a pick or is it a long TD? But it won't be a 5-yard ADOT. It'll be something else.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Okay, let's go from one short king to my short king. Well, my entire approach of this draft was Fafito no matter what. Noah Fafita is my second pick, 4th overall. The Arizona quarterback, my favorite returning player in college football, hands down. I'm going to try and get him on the pod at some point. Would love to be able to make that happen. He is West Coast Russell Wilson without the goober. That is who he is.
Without being a goober.
Yeah.
Without the goober sounds a little bit offensive.
The goober personality.
The goober gene.
If that means that he is limited by Russ standards, then so be it.
Yeah.
Physically, you can see the similarities. Fafita is not 6 feet tall. I'll be surprised if and when that combine comes in pro day, whatever it is, eventually in his career. I'll be surprised if he actually gets to 5'11". Okay, I know that's what he's listed as. I think he's shorter than that. I don't care. I do not care at all. He gets everything he possibly can out of that frame. No play is ever dead with that guy. He has unbelievable confidence. Last year when he took over the starting job against Washington, Arizona was just a different team. I know I talked about it a lot. I felt like on a weekly basis, Arizona was my lock of the week. And that was because Noah Fafita was the quarterback. Last year, the only games that they lost with Fafita were his first 2 starts. And those first 2 starts, home against Washington, they lost by a touchdown. And
pretty good team.
Yeah, pretty good. Things worked out well for Washington. Heard they went to a national championship or whatever. And then the triple OT game at USC, where if Jed Fish had just put the ball in Noah Fafita's hands to be able to go for a 2-point conversion at the end of the first overtime, they win that game. But he was brilliant in that game. He was so good in those 2 losses that they said, you are our guy. We're turning to you. You are the starting quarterback. And then they didn't lose another game the rest of the season. They were a 3-3 football team at Arizona, and they won 10 games and earned their highest AP rating since 1998. Well, this is a guy that just brought that team to new heights. But I'm going to do more than just say, oh, this guy's a winner, okay? Because I hate that. If that's all you're talking about with a quarterback, then chances are he's not very good, and he's benefiting from the circumstances around him. The best Fafita stat that I can throw at you today, and the reason why this guy is number 2, he was number 3 on my big board, but why he's my second pick here. All of his games came against Power 5 competition last year. The only quarterbacks with more touchdown passes against Power 5 competition last year were the 3 quarterbacks who were in New York. The only quarterbacks with multiple games versus Power 5 competition who had a better quarterback rating in those games, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, Carson Beck. This guy showed up when they needed some sort of direction, and they did not have it. It is unfair to say that is the same team we saw look really bad against Mississippi State. They are a totally different team than Noah Fafita at quarterback. What's so cool about this story is this is a kid who's a 3-star recruit coming out of Anaheim. He wasn't getting those big-time offers despite being in such a football hotbed. He commits to Arizona, and then his high school teammate, the decorated Teteroa McMillan, a.k.a. T-Mac. I mean, guy with the name T-Mac.
It's your favorite, yeah.
Yeah, can't get any better than that. He flips from Oregon. He goes to Oregon. And then last year, they formed a duo that was just must-see TV. And so when Jed Fish leaves Arizona for Washington, everyone, myself included, is wondering, are those 2 guys going to follow him to Washington? But instead, they turned down not just Washington, but a lot of other opportunities that were thrown their way in terms of NIL and stuff like that. They stay at Arizona. And not only do they do that, They make a pledge to redistribute some of that NIL money to the rest of their team, those guys that aren't getting taken care of. That is a leader. That is a leader in every sense of the word. I want Noah Fifita running my football team. Arizona might just be America's team for 2024. And if you're thinking to yourself, Connor, I'm going to be getting the new college football video game. I need a team. Mm-hmm. Arizona's your team. Arizona's your team to be. I'm telling you right now, throw jump balls to T-Mac. Let Noah Fifita run wild. He runs to be able to pass. He's not like a run after the line of scrimmage type guy.
Mm-hmm.
I love Noah Fifita. That's my dude.
Yeah, I think, like, to your point, I was sitting here and I was like, well, I could take my guy or your guy, and then you could take my guy and we could be unhappy. And we always end up in these situations where I'm like, you know what? I'm right there with you. I love it. I've been drinking the Kool-Aid. He saved Lock of the Week. He saved Arizona. I think that he is a guy that has dealt really well with expectations. He's also dealt really well with the tumultuous situations. There's something to be said about, upholding your promises, even if, Jed Fish is not going to be there. So I think at the end of the day, there's something to having the option of going to Auburn and not doing it. I mean, at the end of the day, if Noah Fifita called up Yellowwood guy, it was like, hey, give me Auburn. What happened? Let's be honest.
He could have made a lot of money in the portal.
He could have made
Yes. He and McMillan as a package deal. Do you know how many teams across college football are like, man, I wish I had a 1-2 punch like that. Instead, those guys are like, no, let's do this together. Let's stay here. They host a podcast together called Island Time. I need to subscribe. Yeah.
So, yeah, like when you look for athletes anywhere, but overall quarterback, it's those guys that are built a little bit different, that are not following the wave. And I think that Fifita is exactly that. You talked about those deeper stats with the Power 5 and like the fact that he put his team in games single-handedly, to your point. You're not going to have the best talent at Arizona. You had great coaching last year, not taking away from that, but you make your guys believe not only in you, but the team and the team long-term. Oh my gosh. I mean, I wish I could hire people like that.
He is the ideal face of a program, of an organization. And there are others on this list, maybe one that we'll get to. We'll see. You kind of probably know who I'm talking about. I'm not trying to tip picks here. That I think you can question that and question if that's the ideal face that you would want to have for your program right now. I know Fifita is not that guy. I'm thrilled to have gotten Fifita. If you had taken him with the third pick, I don't think I would have just turned off the PS5 and taken my controller and gone home.
Yeah.
But it would have been a level short of that, probably.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, these are supposed to be fun. There's no reason to like fantasy football, like trade whatever somebody. Yeah. On to the next one. You are not going to see this coming. You ready? This guy might not be on your board, but I think by the end of the year, I think if we're going statistics, if we're going big games, Will Howard.
Oh, okay. I did not have Will Howard in my top 10. We're going to get to an honorable mention list in a bit that he was on was high on the honorable mention list. So it was of consideration, but you could have gotten him probably even later than that. You probably could have gotten him with your fifth pick.
Probably. But I'm going to tell you why I like him here, right? And I'm going to compare and contrast with a guy that you may even take next that I looked at, but I was right between these two, and I'll tell you why. I was looking at Jackson Dart, and then I thought about these offenses. And I thought to myself, except for last year, Ryan Day, consistently, you could talk about him in big games, you could talk about his defense, you could talk about other stuff. Consistently, he has been a developer of college quarterbacks. Talk about the NFL, doesn't matter. Still got CJ Stroud. But he went out and handpicked Will Howard. You know what I'm saying? And I think that at the end of the day, when you look at going from Bill O'Brien to Chip Kelly as an offensive coordinator, that tends to pique my interest. When you look at, you have these great running backs coming in, but you also have the Ohio State talent. You also have the Ohio State schedule, which has been a pretty big asset to them. I can close my eyes and imagine Ohio State throwing for 6 or 7 touchdowns on some unsuspecting Big Ten team. Not going to name any names, but point being, I think that we, the ability to rack up the stats, the ability to be in the big games, the ability to have the talent to win the big games. Again, I hate that I put myself in this Ryan Day corner because I think he looks like the Pizza Hut guy, but I just don't like him as a person. But I think that
wait. Which Pizza Hut guy? Are you referring
to
the
one that got canceled? Whatever, or not Pizza Hut, Papa John.
Oh, yeah. Very different.
There we
go.
Sorry. He looks like the Papa John guy. I just don't like him. He's always sweating. His hair black is running down his face. I don't like Ryan Day, but I respect his ability to coach quarterbacks. And that's what this is, a quarterback draft. You have a guy in Will Howard who is massive. He is a dual threat quarterback. He's going to be playing with Chip Kelly, who went, you know what? I did okay with these dual threat quarterbacks. I smoked Coach O, but I don't like to recruit. Give me some talent and a guy that can run. And that's exactly where he's at right now. So it kind of feels like this is a nuts comparison. I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. Feels like when you find a guy with a perfect system. That's how Dan Mullen was for Tim Tebow, right? Where it's like you can maximize the throwing, you can maximize the running, you can maximize this little bit of a bulldozer you got to yourself and the talent around him. And when you have a coach that knows how to use the mobility of a quarterback and to get athletes open in space, which again, Chip Kelly, bad GM, jerk face, many things we could say about him. Great offensive mind. So I think when you marry these people, you marry the weapons, the offensive line play that's always been consistent, the expectations, the fact that, like I said, 8 games on their schedule, they're going to show up and beat the mess out of whoever. The floor here is going to be like 35 to 40 touchdowns because we saw it last year with a way worse quarterback.
What did McCord end up putting up, though?
Oh, I mean, it wasn't good, but there were games where people were like, see, haters because of the receiver core.
Yeah. I have a very high standard for Ohio State quarterbacks, as I think many people listen to.
24 touchdowns from McCord last year.
24 touchdowns in 12 games, right? Because he ends up hitting the portal and opting out before the bowl game.
Yeah. So imagine a good quarterback in that situation.
The only pushback I would give, because I like Will Howard. I felt like at this time last year he was one of my favorite Heisman long shots. I loved the system that he was in with Colin Klein, calling plays and stuff. So if you like the ability and you like the play caller, what you do with Chip Kelly, you like the surrounding pieces, what they've done in the portal, a running back room that should be second to none with Judkins and Henderson. You feel good about those things, right? You feel good about all the things that should help a quarterback in his spot. Mm-hmm. Are we sure, without a doubt, that he holds on to the job for the entire season? Or is there a world, any world, in which I don't want to say there's not really a comp that I want to go to for this. I started to think
can't do worse than me, buddy. Throw it out there.
Right. Look. Is there a world in which a desperate Ryan Day looks at the situation with Will Howard after 4 or 5 weeks of just feeling like, man, this is Kyle McCord all over again. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like we're getting to the places that I think we can get to, and then turns to Devin Brown. Is there any world in which that happens? Because that was that and maybe the offensive line play, which is kind of the question mark for Ohio State. Those were the only 2 things that probably prevented me from putting him into my top 10.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I mean, but if you kind of look at the way the schedule starts off, you know what I'm saying, with Ohio State, Akron, right? Western Michigan, Marshall, Michigan State. So,
yeah, you're right.
Competition. Just kidding. I mean, no, Michigan State, I respect, the new head coach, everything he's done, but it's not Ohio State. You know what I'm saying? So their first real test is honestly at Oregon. And by that point, you're in mid-October. You've already played Iowa at home. And again, we love Iowa. I'm not here to dump on Iowa, but if you lose to Iowa, this isn't the old Ohio State. This isn't the old Iowa. This is a defensive team, even with the transfers Iowa's gotten in. They just can't figure it out on that side. And again, things are changing. I get it. But I think that if the schedule was different, I would agree with you. If they had that Oregon game as a kickoff game and it comes out and gets embarrassed, or it's a low-scoring game, and McCord was in enough of those games. The Notre Dame game was almost that game, right? It was almost that game where it was like, uh-oh, we may not be as good as we thought, buddy. And they got embarrassed by Oregon a couple of years ago with a good quarterback. And so point being, I think that he's able to rack up so many stats in those first 5 weeks that it would be so hard to bench him because he might have 20 touchdowns. You know what I'm saying? I mean, he might already be at McCord's numbers by the time they play Oregon. So if he struggles at Oregon, okay, boom, you got Nebraska. Penn State is an NPC team. We talked about that. So they really only have 2 teams on their level, Oregon and Michigan's falling off a cliff too. So it's interesting. You have a good matchup, my 2 quarterbacks. So hopium either way, right? Either Gabriel Balls or Will Howard. I've insulated myself.
Okay, fair enough. First, that's the first real surprise I think so far. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm surprised he's still on the board at 6 overall. I'm almost tempted to wait because based on that, you're not taking him with your next pick. But I'll take Jalen Milroe. We know the flaws. We fully understand the flaws. Got to avoid some of the sack numbers. I think having a center that can snap the football will help with some of that. I do.
Yeah.
You can't take 44 sacks in a season. Not coming back as now, a second year starter. Got to be better in the intermediate passing game. He and Carson Beck in a weird way are almost like inverses of each other with like what they do well. It's kind of strange. Like some of the deep ball stuff with Milroe,
Big
you look at it and you're like, yeah, I mean, I
hate to be that guy, but like when it gets time to lock in, Jalen Milroe was a foxhole guy.
The job that he did closing out that game against Georgia, man, I don't know. I don't know that history will give that enough credit because it was remarkable to do the things he did down the stretch against Kirby Smart defense. And yeah, you can say it wasn't a vintage Georgia defense, but still, man, that is a difficult thing to do.
And against Auburn, and against LSU, and against Ole Miss. And I mean, every week they were in a dogfight. And the only one they almost lost was when he didn't play it. Honestly, the USF game, I mean, Auburn, they almost lost. I'm not trying to take that away from Auburn, but like, it just felt like when he locked in, it was like 14 of 14 on third down against LSU.
There's an element of luck to 4th and 31. There is.
Yeah.
There is a crazy element of skill. There just is. And poise and confidence and all those different things. And I liked it. I know we gave him a lot of praise in the second half of the season. The A&M game, I think some of the throws and some of the plays that he was making that day in College Station, you're just like, man, this is a guy who's figuring it out and has really
the Tennessee game
to come back from early deficit. Where Ole Miss is another one where not maybe a vintage game in the way that some of those others were, but guy just makes plays and did not have some of the surroundings that I think some previous Alabama quarterbacks have had. From early October through conference championship weekend. So we're going to disregard, postseason stuff like that. Milroe, we know what the Michigan game was. He had a lot of plays in that game that he wished he could have had back for sure. But from early October through the conference championship weekend, how many players played the quarterback position better than Milroe? Because I would put Jaden Daniels ahead of him, maybe Carson Beck, but that's a toss-up. And then Milroe won the head-to-head with him on a neutral site.
Yep.
So you kind of look at it and you're going, man, that's why he's, he finished higher in the Heisman voting than any returning player in college football. And I know I brought that up a lot, but it's because of the player that he was. I had a long drawn out thought on Sunday morning thinking to myself, am I about to put Jalen Milroe on my Heisman ballot? I know there are a lot of people that would push back on that because of the flaws. And there are people that are wondering, is this going to work with this scheme? He's not going to be asked to be Michael Penix. He's just not. Okay. I can't imagine there's a world in which Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan want this guy throwing 40 to 45 times a game. He is not as polished as Michael Penix, so I don't think that's happening. But I believe you can win a national title with Milroe as your quarterback, and I wouldn't have said that in the first part of last year.
His legs and neck are what Michael Penix does not have. He has
very true
tree trunk, neck, and legs that could just run you over, whereas Michael Penix has had a leg injuries. Like, he can't really take those hits. Milroe's like, dude, please come try to tackle me. I would love that.
Built like a tank. Nobody is more feared as a runner when he gets in space than Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe, his celebration should just be a flex. Every single time he breaks off a run that moves the chains, don't do the lame first down thing. Just sit up there and just flex like that. Just right on whoever you're on. I won't say that's immature or anything like that. If I looked like Jalen Milroe, I would be finding mirrors to flex in. All right? Let me tell you
wearing the Saquon Barkley jersey every day.
Every single day to the gym, going leg day, arm day, don't care.
Got it.
It's every single day. He's built like a tank. And the improvements that he can make in the passing game, I think, are still there. Look, he finished in top 5 in quarterback rating with just 6 picks all year. After the things that we said about him early on, I think that there is a lot of room for improvement. But I think he's already one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. So I'm good with getting him as my third pick, 6 overall.
Just to do like a level set here, the more I think about last season, the more I think we can just all admit that Tommy Rees was not any good. I think if you really just look at how they actually won the games, it was kind of just Jalen Milroe going, bro, please stop talking to me.
Like, there's a certain bit of that as a coordinator, you have to be able to recognize that. Cliff Kingsbury used to talk about that with Manziel, about how like that first game that Manziel started against Florida, they tried to do too much stuff with him and they tried to put too much on his plate in terms of script. And they're like, hey, everything's got to be this on-time throw here, on-time throw there. Yeah. And then right after that, they're like, what are we doing? Let's let this guy just go be Johnny Manziel. And there's a certain bit of, I don't want to say awareness that needs to come if you're a coordinator, say like Let your guy do what he does best. And I do think Tommy Rees deserves some credit for that. There was more awareness of that later on in the season than there was earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that like when Milrow was himself, I mean, when he was not trying to fit whatever scheme, pro style, Brian Kelly trauma that Tommy Rees is still trying to work through. And when he was like, I'm going to be Jalen Milrow, I'm going to make this work with either my legs, I'm going to improvise something. I mean, those were all of the highlights of Alabama's season, other than that weird day where Jermaine Burton turned into Prime Megatron. But outside of that, no one could have predicted the Jermaine Burton Megatron game. But same deal there. He's like, guess what? I guess Jermaine Burton's Megatron today. That's what I'm going to do today. So like, that's my thing is that like, I think that if you take out like, if you think about the struggles last year, you think about how horrible the offensive line was, not running from that one. The offensive line is going to be much better this year. Okay. Then you think about these huge big time throws, ice in your veins. That's a lot of individual effort. So if you really think about what he did well, it was almost all outside of the scheme. You could say some of the same things about Jaden Daniels. If you watch the highlights of the Florida game, it was Jaden Daniels, dunking and diving and doing everything. What's up?
So to your point, though, you talk about like what he did well. The coordinators that he's worked with, he worked with Bill O'Brien, who didn't think he should be who didn't think he should be a quarterback.
Right.
He worked with Tommy Rees, a guy that you're saying like didn't put him in particularly good spots. This is the best tight ends coach for the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah.
And now he's working with a coaching staff that is known for what they have done with developing quarterbacks.
Yep.
And you would think he's being put in the best spots now. It doesn't guarantee that he's all of a sudden going to pick up where he left off SEC championship level last year. Because there could be some tough moments early on where you're like still not kind of getting the system, all those things. I do think Jeremy Bernard, his presence, I've talked about that, all being the drum team member, he will help. Mm-hmm. But if he's being put in those spots, one would think that projects really, really well for a guy that still has some developing to do.
Yeah, and I think, and it feels unnecessary to bring him up here, but I will. It's like for a season, I'll take Carson Beck, but for a game, I'm taking Milrow. Because he showed in that SEC championship game, by hook or crook, he would get that first down. It did not matter what he had to do, if he had to run 3 people over, if he had to throw off balance. His stats, like if you look back, weren't great or anything in that game, but it was the third downs, it was the big plays, it was the chunk plays. And Carson Beck, again, not to just dump on the kid for no reason, that game swung on a handoff, like the most basic play in the world. And I just could not imagine Jalen Milrow doing that because, yeah, he had some bad sacks. Yeah, he had some bad turnovers early in his career. But do you remember even earlier this season, we were talking about Jalen Milrow, this turnover machine. Now, first it was turnovers, then it was bad sacks. As the season started going on, he started eliminating those parts of his game, and he just couldn't, not to be mean, couldn't fix Tommy Rees. But whenever he could be himself and say, look, this game's on the line, I'm going to be to blame for it, not you. I'm going to make this happen my way. But now you combined him with exactly what you just said, a guy who has made his whole career all the way back Sioux Falls into being one of the best offensive minds in football, not just the college game. A guy that turned Michael Penix from a guy who couldn't finish a season to a number 8 overall draft pick just based on his throwing ability, no mobility. So if you combine those concepts and that freedom, right, it's going to take him a while, right? I think that, it's same deal as last year. Look, if you had told me in week 3 of last year that Jalen Milrow was going to be in the conversation for the Heisman at the end of the year, we would have both laughed in your face. But he got better. That's the style of athlete, competitor, learner he is. So that pick in week 3, might not look great, but by week 8, it's going to make a lot of sense.
I'm sensing a little bit of regret.
I'm already rooting for Ohio State. I don't want to root for Alabama too. I'll be fine. All right.
All right. You have 2 picks left. I have 2
picks left. Thank you for reminding me of that.
This is your 4th pick.
Okay. Well, you know what? Since I'm here, since he's here, I've already gone off the board. I think I'm just going to go ahead and go a little bit chalky here and get my boy Jackson Dart. Now, I know that I already kind of undersold him and everything, but the reason for that isn't Jackson Dart. It's the offense. It's the fact that we've talked about, if you really think about it, Tennessee and Ole Miss are running teams, right? It's the fact that they have these talented running backs, that their ground game last year didn't come from Jackson Dart as much. Now he was finally able to get in the end zone, right? But it was about, it was kind of a 3-headed monster in a way, or maybe even a 4-headed monster. But point being, I think that this Ole Miss team is going to be special. I think that if they're not, it will be disappointing for maybe the first time in Ole Miss history. Because even the years with Hugh that they weren't as great as you thought, it was either the scandal or they still beat Alabama. Let me tell y'all something. When you beat Nick Saban, really doesn't matter what happens from there. Ask Steven Garcia about that. His whole life has just been, I beat Nick Saban once. And so point being, this is the first real Ole Miss team that if they didn't have expectations, or if they didn't meet the expectations, it would be disappointing. And I think that he is just like some of these other guys in a great situation, talking about the transfers coming in, talking about the defense, talking about the way they've built the trenches in Oxford, and another guy who is a perfect fit with his coach, right? California guy. Lane Kiffin with the long hair, throwing his clipboard, giving the memes. He's proven, we joked about him, like the body language and how he is so frustrated with Jackson Dart. We talked about it. We tried to give away his job to Sanders last offseason. Now we don't have any of that, okay? And yeah, you look at his stats and they're like kind of a little bit more pedestrian than you think last year. 23 touchdowns, okay? But it's his second 20 touchdown effort in this offense. And the first one, like we talked about, he had more turnovers. Lane Kiffin didn't trust him as much. He wasn't as great in the big games. He imploded against LSU in 2022. This year, he put his foot on their throats. And I mean, I think that the only like moments you could really point to are, again, the Bama game. Who among us didn't lose to Jalen Milroe, right? The other part of it is like, I think that we are now getting to a point where he's going to have some of the same freedom that Matt Corral had. And while Corral was a better athlete, while maybe he was a little bit more of a competitor, Jackson Dart's a little bit more of a laid-back guy. I think we've started to see that in Jackson Dart. I think that's what's changed in him. He's gone from kind of that laid-back, Johnny Cool guy to, oh, it's on me to win this game. It's on me. I could be, and this is crazy to say out loud, he could be the best quarterback in Ole Miss history if they go in and they win a playoff game this year. Because you talk about, yeah, they had Eli Manning. Yeah, they had Archie Manning. But those guys didn't compete for a championship. This is a championship competing season for Ole Miss, and this could be the guy that paves the way for the future of this program. And that's so special when you have an offensive mind and a coaching staff that's on the same page the way that Ole Miss is. I think that, yeah, his numbers may not even be as gaudy as Will Howard's, but when he needs to be him, he's shown he can be.
When Will's pounding the table for a guy, he must be good.
Yeah.
Does it change your impression of Dart to know that he's actually from Utah and not Southern California?
Well, I'm saying he went to USC to kind of chase that lifestyle. You know what I'm saying?
Fair. Okay, fair. Well, he's Southern California adjacent. That's
right.
Fine.
Well, it's like the guys that go to USC and the guys that go to Ole Miss are just different guys, right? Like if you go to USC, you want the biggest city life, you want the stars, you want to play for, I guess it wasn't Lincoln Riley at that point. No. So point being, that's even worse. So point being, if you go to Ole Miss, you go play with Lane Kiffin, you're there to play football, you're there to get drafted, you're there to have a little bit of fun. But it's kind of in that order,
The Jackson Dart 180 fully completed in the bowl game. Mm-hmm. And I was critical of him at this time last year. I said, you know what? I think there are limitations with what he can do. I don't like that he doesn't appear to have a nose for the end zone in some of these running situations. To not have a single rushing touchdown in the regular season was one of those baffling stats for a guy that ran as much as he did.
Yep.
That everything that I asked Jackson Dart to do, like, sitting here and saying like, hey, what's going to make you an elite quarterback? He did. He became that runner who was fearless around the goal line, would call his own number in some of those key spots. It's 7 regular season rushing touchdowns last year, and then he had another one in the bowl game too.
Yep.
The dip in production that I saw from him in the games against FBS teams with a winning record, that changed in 23. Like the year that he had against those quality foes, against FBS teams with a winning record, he had 9.7 yards per attempt, 12 to 3 TD to INT ratio, and he also ran for an average of 39 yards per game in those spots. He was everything that Ole Miss needed. Okay. That doesn't mean that he is a perfect quarterback. Obviously, I think he is still probably feeling the effects of that Georgia game, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
He got beat up, and the Alabama hurdle still exists. But the surroundings are great. The group of pass catchers is second to none. It's the best group of pass catchers in the SEC. He's getting Lane Kiffin in year 3 as a starter. And there are very few situations that are more ideal than that one. The schedule sets up well. Only having Georgia's the only game on that schedule that I look at and say, nope, not picking Ole Miss to win that one. They might be favored in 11 of their 12 regular season games. And the offseason Good Vibes team, in large part, is because of Jackson Dart coming back and being the face of this program this year. I had him in 6th on my board. He would have been my next pick. So I like what you did there.
And I think there's a foil element between him and Will Howard, where I think he's a better quarterback than Will Howard, but Will Howard will have better stats. Whereas, like, you look at, he doesn't have a ton of those, like, 4 touchdown games. You guys want to get LSU, who among us? But point being, if you look at the schedule, like you were talking about, there are some good teams on this schedule, but there are a lot of great defenses. Kentucky, year in and year out, pretty good defense, but you could make an argument that's the second best defense here.
They were bad last year. They were really bad last year.
They were bad. That's the thing. That's all for reputation, and kind of the same thing with Venables. They were okay. They got better, right? But those are not like Georgia level elite defenses. And again, Georgia is I guess they just are reloading at this point, and maybe they'll just never be bad at defense again. And we saw that in the spring game. That defense looks great. Not taking anything away from that, but I mean that's blanketed by Arkansas and Florida. So you can play like crap against Georgia and still be fine. I think in the modern college football world.
Yeah. Okay. Dart is number 7 overall.
Oh, and no Bama on the schedule, by the way, which is wild
Yes.
for us to adjust to. But that's like such a big thing for him because that takes out another game that could be a loss, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I think 11-1 is realistic for Ole Miss. Doesn't mean it's a guarantee, but 11-1 as a ceiling for a program that just had its first 11-win season ever is a crazy thought and not one that's very far off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going a little bit rogue here.
Okay.
Again, we are saying best quarterbacks for the 2024 season.
Yep.
So there is projecting here. Okay. I
Okay.
get that. I'm going with Nico Iamaleava.
Okay.
I'm going Nico. Nico was 7 on my board. I'm going to get pushback on this, and I fully understand that. Okay, there are people that are saying that I'm sipping the Kool-Aid, and maybe I am sipping a little bit too much orange Kool-Aid on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. I get it. I fully get it. I am not saying that he's going to become Peyton Manning or that he's even going to be quite as good as 2022 Hendon Hooker, who was one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in all of college football before he went down with the season-ending injury against South Carolina. Iamaleava is in a really, really nice spot to succeed for reasons that we have outlined and reasons that we will continue to outline, because you know that he's got a great supporting cast at the pass catcher spots with a healthy Brew McCoy. I think we see the full version of Squirrel White unlocked in this offense. The addition of Chris Brazzle II from Tulane is going to be huge. I am going to say Brazzle Dazzle so many times on this very show. Did I wear a shirt that says Razzle Dazzle on it today with Shaq and Penny Hardaway? Oh, yes, I did. Yes, I did. Thank you to the YouTube audience for being able to see that. I love what he is walking into, and that is why I'm so high on him, because you know a Josh Heupel ground game is going to give you an average of 200 yards per game. That's what he's done each year that he has been a head coach. Okay, I like the odds of that continuing with 3 starters back on that offensive line, with all Bang the Drum team member Dylan Sampson leading the way. Love all those things. In 5 of Heupel's 6 seasons as a head coach, his starting quarterback racked up at least 32 total touchdowns. The only year it didn't happen was last year with Joe Milton, and he had 27. All the things we said about Joe Milton, they still ended up having 27 touchdowns. Not bad from a statistical standpoint. This isn't an anti-Joe Milton thing that I need to go on. We've already talked enough about that.
Okay? I am, but yeah.
Not trying to be mean to him. I hope that guy is a great vibes guy in the locker room in the NFL. I look forward to seeing him in some of these pregame videos that'll come out. Do we think that Nico, with all the talent that we've talked about for multiple years, do we think he is about to be the least successful Josh Heupel quarterback? I don't.
I love that.
I don't. I know I am not worried about the fact that he didn't have 1 billion yards in the spring game. I think Tennessee fans are kind of like, oh, wait a minute. We've got, a guy that looks, a 50-year guy who's former walk-on who's lighting it up, and Nico's not necessarily putting up the same sort of numbers. Relax, okay? I don't like to quote Aaron Rodgers very much, but relax. Nico is going to be just fine. I think he ends up being a top 10 quarterback by season's end. I think he has 35 touchdowns, 4,000 total yards. So give me Nico with my 4th pick, 8th overall.
I love that pick so much. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's literally a version of the Jackson Dart pick, but it's also a guy who is, objectively, I think a little bit more talented as an athlete with his legs, the smoothness he plays the game with. It feels like he's already in the right system. It feels like I love the concept of, is this the worst quarterback he's had? Because it's certainly not. And if you had drafted, any quarterback pretty much that Josh Heupel had, Hooker was a solid player before he met Josh Heupel, but together they did unprecedented things, at Tennessee in terms of the last 20 or so years.
Hooker wasn't even handpicked to be his guy. Milton was handpicked to be his guy. Hooker was a Pruitt guy that Pruitt brought in. And he's like, you know what? Joe Milton's hurt. I guess we'll turn to this Hendon Hooker guy. And then he becomes one of the best players in Tennessee history.
Yeah, I watched an Old Dominion quarterback slice a good LSU defense just because of, Josh Heupel. And I feel like I believe in him, to your point. Yeah, it's a running offense, but he also is could be involved in that. And I didn't give Jackson Dart enough credit as a runner, but Yamaliava, I feel like could be a little bit more of that opportunistic runner as well, where he can have the top end speed. If he can break one, he can break one. But it's
Yep.
more about getting the offense moving. That offense, if you keep it moving, I mean, it's like, you know what, man, have a good day. Have a good day. And we saw it last year. Joe Milton was just not a great quarterback. Not to belabor the point, but it was the fact that he was herky jerky and not on schedule. Yamaliava feels like he is on schedule for the entirety of his life. He feels like his alarm goes off. He immediately pops out of bed. He does the same thing every day. He feels like he knows he's in control from the time he wakes up to the time he goes to sleep. I love this pick.
It's talent, it's scheme. It should be working in his favor. So a bit of a surprise. I know I might get some pushback when we tweet out these final results, but wanted to make sure that I got him because I am a believer in the talent. And I almost took this other guy that I think you're about to take. I think I know who you're going to take. Brady Cook, right?
Man. It was a coin flip, Connor, but then you took Ayamaleava, and I said, let's shoot for the stars. I'm taking Nussmeier.
Oh, there we go. That's the type of guy you have to take with that's your last pick.
Yep.
As your fifth pick. I
Yep.
love taking it. You got to take like at least one of these flyers to be able to work in there.
Yep.
Was on honorable mention. We were going to talk about him if he wasn't drafted. I had a feeling you would take him with this pick, though, even though I was obviously just wrong about it.
No, dude, it was another hair's breadth, and it's great that I ended up with Howard and Dart. Maybe I should have drafted them in opposite orders, and it would have made more sense. But people are going to ding me on that, but I ended up with both of them. But same deal here. If I had another pick, it would be Cook. But I think that Nussmeier, it's just about situation. As much as we could be positive about Cook, my couple of favorite receivers, that boy Weiss. With Mizzou, we've seen it for a season. 2 in a row feels a little bit just optimistic based on their trajectory. I think that you got to give credit to the coaching staff that just coached the most prolific quarterback, not passer necessarily, because that's probably Joe Burrow, but for a single season quarterback, when you factor in running, when you factor in decision making, the reads, everything that Jaden Daniels did last year. And I talked about this coaching staff. They kept the guys that they needed to keep. They kept Joe Sloan. They kept Hankton. They are bringing in these receivers like Kyron Lacey. Oh my gosh, I hated that guy. Not hated him, but I just didn't like the drop against A&M. I didn't like that he was a Billy Napier guy from UL. I didn't like him. Now he looks like he is just going to be this transcendent number one receiver for everything everybody's saying about practice. You're talking about CJ Daniels coming in, talking about some of these guys like kind of off the board, Chris Hilton. I think that finally, and I talked about what LSU's offenses could be a little bit, but having the tight ends, having this offensive line that I still think was a top 2 or 3 last year, maybe number 1 in the country, bringing back both of your tackles with the most surefire number 1 or first round draft pick in the SEC in Will Campbell. I think that there's so much on the offensive side of the ball to like for LSU, but here's the other part of it. I don't think this defense gets better in the season. So I think that just like Jaden Daniels, he is going to be out there slinging that thing deep into the fourth quarter. And it's a lot easier for me to imagine him fighting for his life at the end of a fourth quarter game than it is Will Howard. Will Howard's going to need to rack up those stats early against bad teams. Every week is a week for Garrett Nussmeier to have 4 or 5 touchdowns like JD because he has the receivers, and his team I don't think is going to be up by 20 points in a lot of SEC games because I think Blake Baker has a big job on his hands. I don't think that's anything special. So I think that when you think about why Jaden Daniels won last year, the losses, whatever, but he just had way more opportunity than Joe Burrow did because Joe Burrow was sitting there on the bench. He was almost in the bench for that Ole Miss game that they quote unquote came back for. So point being, I think that's a big thing when you think about quarterbacks, the amount of reps, the amount of situations where, you can hand the ball off to this great running back in Jackson and the stable they got there. Yeah, you have this great offensive line, but when the game is on the line, you're a guy who's been at LSU longer than, anybody? I mean, he was starting against Arkansas during the COVID year. I think it was 2021 he started against Arkansas. And so this is a guy who loves LSU. He knows his team better than almost anybody on this list. He's not a transfer. Like we talked about, you're about the right things. He has grown with this roster and he's waited his turn. He's a coach's son. Hate to throw out all the cliches, but I think there's so much to like about Nussmeier. And here's the fact about Nussmeier too. This guy is a gun slinger, and I don't think they can coach it out of him because they're going to need it. They're going to need a guy who tests the defense deep last year, just like Jaden did. And they have the speedy receivers. Yeah, they don't have Neighbors and BTJ. That's, nobody does. But I think that the speed guys, all these receivers are speed guys. All these tight ends are huge. They all have a role. So I'm excited about, the offense of LSU next year.
I like Garrett Nussmeier a lot. And it's he's a difficult preseason rank because you could end up feeling really stupid
Mm-hmm.
about putting him as like the seventh best quarterback in the SEC, even though I've talked about it ad nauseum. The fact that the top five is really solidified when you're talking about guys that are coming back either off New Year's Six bowls or off playoff bowls.
Yep.
And you're looking at the surrounding circumstances as an LSU fan going, well, gosh, despite what we just lost with three skill guys in the first round to lose an offensive play caller, you're still feeling really good. And there are
Yep.
not a whole lot of teams that can say that. I'm interested to see if Nussmeier can avoid the grenade games, avoid the three interception.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, you fell behind by 21 or something like that in the first half of a game that LSU should have won, and you know that defense is not going to be able to get enough stops. That's I think is going to define how we feel about him by season's end. Are there going to be those moments in which you say, "Oh my God, anybody else right now? I cannot believe that he made that throw." And I thought the
Me
maturity that he
watching him
showed.
come into the Mizzou game when JD we thought broke a rib, just like, oh God, who's he going to throw this ball to?
Yeah, please no.
Yeah.
Just take a breath, hand the ball off for the love of God, please.
Kick a field goal, please.
So that's probably my only reservation with him.
Yeah.
But I like the player. We've been talking about him, the intrigue for a long time. Yeah, he started his career in 21 because this is his fourth year there. He has a chance to be this year's version of Carson Beck. That's I think the upside for him. Guy that waited his turn and now in year 4 has the keys to this offense, and it'll be very interesting to see. Okay,
I love this draft. Sorry, you go. Yeah,
it's a good draft, man. It's there are some guys that we're going to get to an honorable mention in a second here that I think would show up on a lot of drafts. And so I'll round us out here. I didn't intend for it to work out quite this way, but I will take Brady Cook. I will take him.
Of course.
In most seasons, he's coming back as an obvious first-team All-SEC guy. This is not most seasons, okay? So Mizzou fans, I know you're going to be really fired up. You're going to be so angry when that list comes out in July and you see that your quarterback is not getting the preseason All-SEC love. And then you realize, all right, yeah, this list is super, super deep. You have 3 quarterbacks who are among the 5 best in the sport. Don't take it as a personal slight when we say that Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers and Jalen Milroe are better than your guy, okay? Don't take it as a personal slight. Cook became the player that I never thought he could. He really did. And we talked about how mid he felt for so much of that time as a starter. And last year, he took games over. We saw him show incredible toughness. We saw him unlock a Mizzou offense that felt like he was just begging for life. And Kirby Moore, my number 1 overall pick in the SEC OC draft that we had, he gets a lot of credit for that. Okay, so I don't necessarily think that it's automatic that he turns into that player if Drink is still running things from a play caller standpoint. I really think that it was the right person to come in and unlock the best version of Brady Cook. My trust in him is a big reason why I think that Cook can make this a 2-year thing and not just a 1-year thing. They returned so many of those pieces on offense. I mean, yes, you lose Cody Schrader, a guy that meant so much to that program. You know, what does it look like at the tackle spot without Foster, somebody that, you know, didn't get enough credit. But, man, you look at it up and down, you're going, they should be even better. There's no reason why Mizzou shouldn't have one of the 10 or 15 best offenses in all of college football. I think that Luther Burden is going to start off as an All-American, and if he's not, I'd be surprised. I'd be kind of wondering why he's not in those certain spots, but I think he will get that kind of love. Probably the best returning receiver in all of college football. He and T-Mac, Tez Johnson, like that's kind of the list. That's what you're looking at. How many guys wish that they had someone who could throw the ball to a guy like Luther Burden? You know, like the things that Burden does with his route running, he's automatic in some of these mismatches where Brady Cook, the ability to just look at a guy at the line of scrimmage and go, he's getting open. I can throw the ball anywhere, and I know he's going to be able to go and get it, is so unique and so rare. And he can do that. And it's not just Luther Burden, because I think he was banged up down the stretch, and they were still able to find ways to be able to win football games. Your boy Theo Weiss is a big part of that. Mookie Cooper. He's going to be one of those guys that we're looking up going, man, he had such an impact on this team. And it felt like he really did down the stretch last year. The 6'7" Brett Norfleet, keep your eye on him. The young tight end who they started to throw to a lot more down the stretch last year. My only concern with Brady Cook is that he'll be asked to do a little bit more of the heavy lifting. And if this defense falls off and then all of a sudden he gets forced into some bad habits, trying to make too many plays or trying to take on too much of that, there is that risk. But again, maybe he is set up more for statistical success as a result of that. And I think that there's a lot to like here with 3 returning starters on that offensive line, a running back room that, as you know, added a couple of 1,000-yard rushers and all that talent that they have in the receiver room. Huge year ahead for Brady Cook. A very worthy pick, I think, to round out this draft. I feel like I've said a lot this offseason. Yeah, I think Brady Cook is one of the 10 best quarterbacks in all of college football, and I just put my money where my mouth is and made him the 10th pick.
Put your money in that bank, as they say. But yeah, point.
What a deep cut.
Here's my question for you. Exactly what you just hit on at the end, right? Okay, so one thing about our boy Drake is he is going to hand the running back the ball upwards of 250 times. And last year, that guy was Cody Schrader. He got 170 carries the year before that. And my question becomes, what do you think about that run game this year? Let me just ask you that question.
I like it a lot because you bring in a couple of guys. You bring in a couple of that former 1,000-yard rushers. You bring in a couple of guys from the group of 5 level. I think Carroll's going to end up being the guy coming from Georgia State, but you should still feel like there is maybe there isn't that Tyler Beatty, that Larry Roundtree, that Cody Schrader type bell cow, and they're not quite at that level. But you don't have to have that guy. You don't have to have that guy with a passing game that should be as good as this one is. So I think that there is more of an opportunity. And again, I think Cook being a little bit banged up, Burden being a little bit banged up, with Cody Schrader kind of taking off the way that he did down the stretch, I think that sort of changed a little bit of their offensive identity down the stretch. So I think they're going to have even more reliance on the passing game. I think the ability for his numbers to take another step is very much on the table.
Yeah, I think, you know what's really funny, man? Marcus Carroll is a guy that I was on like last year, just kind of because obviously LSU played him and whatever. And I remember verbally saying to myself when I looked at him, who's coaching this guy, Drink? Because he literally had almost exactly the same like carries. I think so Schrader was at 276 and he was at 274. Yep. Like the way they used him was like almost exactly perfect. So that's why I was asking you about that, because you're right. Like it's now, granted, not the same success, right? The average, the competition is not the same. Despite both of them having the joy of playing LSU. I mean, Schrader was almost a full yard per carry better. So like I do think that is a hand in glove fit in that game, in that part of the run game. All I'm saying simply is that, I mean, Cody Schrader was almost an automatic first down every time you handed him the ball. If that decreases 10 to 15%, which we're talking about, I don't know Mizzou's all-time running backs list, but Cody Schrader's got to be up there. You know what I'm saying? In terms of what he did for the program, in terms of how dependable he was, how many carries. I mean, again, over 2 years, what he's done. So point being, I think if you take that 10 to 15% off and that, now you're facing 3rd and 1 versus you're facing an easy first down. You get to, you got to see something. I will say that with Brady Cook, and I hate to say bless his heart because it sounds bad, but the times where they've needed him to be a runner, he's done it. He's run his butt off for Mizzou. I'll give him credit. The Georgia game is a good example. That weird Arkansas game in 2022, like where he just became Lamar Jackson for a game and he just kept, he had like 3 rushing touchdowns or something in that game. So point being, like I am optimistic about it. Like I said, the only thing that scares me is just I feel like maybe their best football was last year, and this year is a little bit more of a bridge year.
But they might not be as good as they were last year, but the schedule is forgiving. It is so forgiving. Pull up that schedule right now.
Okay.
And tell me that Mizzou going 10-2 is crazy, because it's not.
Wow.
It is the most favorable schedule, in my opinion, in the SEC.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. The SEC dark money wants Mizzou to be successful. Yeah.
Right?
This was Alabama or Georgia. We'd be throwing a fit that they got this schedule. Yeah, you're right. I mean, Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt, those are NPC teams.
Don't sleep on going to UMass, as we talked about very in depth. We never sleep on the road game at UMass.
Sorry. You're right. You're so right. It's such a weird schedule. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, there's like this stretch right here of like Auburn, Alabama, Oklahoma, South Carolina, where like that's really going to show what this team is about, because there's no, I mean, South Carolina it's at South Carolina is the reason I say that. It's at Bryant Denny, right? So I think, if you can hope to get out of that 3-1, 2-2, you'd be feeling pretty good about yourself. I think that, again, at Bryant Denny, it's hard. You just never know what these night games.
That's the one. That's the one game that you look at and you're like, all right, that's Mizzou's going to be against the 8 ball. Everywhere else you kind of look at and you're like, all right, it's not crazy to think I'm winning at home against Oklahoma or something like that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
It is just set up so much better than it has been in, I think, a lot of years that I feel like people have looked at Mizzou's schedule.
Yeah, there's not even a Florida game on here. Like, I'm trying to think of the game that will go in and scare them. Maybe at A&M. Like, not to do a schedule breakdown, but, like, you're right. Like, this is such an interesting – because in one aspect, you think of, oh, Brady Cook is this consistent model of whatever. But in the other, you're like, oh, so much is changing. The SEC is changing. Like, is this – here's the question, really, that we're both saying in different ways. Is this added workload going to make him better or worse? And I think that's a fascinating question that we can put a pin in, because as this leader, as this guy who Drake wants to date his daughter, you would hope he gets him better. And I'm excited to see that, because talking about the best receiving corps in the SEC, I mean, Burden might be the best receiver. And that boy Weiss, he's like top 10 probably. I mean, so like in the SEC at least, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, in the SEC. I was going to say, I wouldn't put Weiss as like a top 10 receiver nationally, but I get what you're saying.
But I mean, how many teams have 2 top 10 receivers in the SEC? You know what I'm saying? So that's the key, is that I put him right there. And for a game, he could be a number 1. You know what I'm saying? Sure. We've seen that. So that's a lot of words to say. I'm fascinated by Brady Cook. I'm fascinated by Mizzou, especially with this schedule.
Okay, so let's recap the draft before we do some honorable mention here. Mm-hmm. You had Quinn Ewers, Dylan Gabriel, Will Howard, Jackson Dart, Garrett Nussmeier, and I had Carson Beck, Noah Fafita, Jalen Milroe, Nico Iamaleava, and Brady Cook. I did not intend to have 4 or 5 SEC quarterbacks as mine with Fafita, but
it makes sense when you say it out loud. Go with what you know.
Go with what you know.
You know?
Yeah. Okay, so the guy that was first off my board that didn't make the cut, who I guess is honorable mention, was Cam Rising. I almost took him coming off of the injury, though. Like, not playing last year. Like, it just felt weird, and it's frustrating that he has not necessarily been able to, kind of have the swan song that he hoped for. Maybe he's going to have it this year in year 7, but that guy needs to stop getting hurt in the Rose Bowl. Just stop.
So one creative or constructive feedback there.
Yeah. Get this, Will. One quick Cam Rising stat that's going to be my favorite. He turns 25 in a couple of weeks. That means by the time that he signs pen to paper with an NFL team in 2025, very likely he's going to be 26 years old. This is
Brady
Chris
Cook,
Winkie.
for context, is about to be like 22, I think, or he is 23, about to be 23. It's like, oh, he feels old. This is a different level of old. This is like, again, can run a car, can qualify for a mortgage.
Yeah, there are coaches that are going to be younger than Cam Rising. So I almost went with him. Didn't quite make the cut.
Older than Zion.
Yeah, I think he is. Yeah.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, Zion's like 25, I think.
Can we talk about Shedeur Sanders?
Man, he was sitting here. Shout out to our guy Brad, who does these great lists. He's sitting here number 2 on Brad's list. I knew you weren't going to take him, and after this week's events, I don't want to be next to that.
I struggled with this one. I did, because he took 52 sacks behind an offensive line that was terrible. If we're going to talk about the things that Spencer Rattler did behind a bad offensive line, and talk about, like, we have to talk about it with Sanders, PFF had him for 39 pressures that were self-created. And Tom Fornelli pointed out that he was dead last in Power 5 with 3.96 pressures per sack, which basically means dude's holding on to the football too much. That's the issue. We know that's the issue.
This is the guy Saints fans think Derek Carr is.
No. Derek Carr gets rid of the football quickly.
No, he takes bad sacks. That's what the Saints fans hate him for. I know, but that's what they think.
Yeah, I mean, look, very, very different players, needless to say. But, like, the bad is obvious, okay? Like, we're trying to project what it's going to look like this year, and the reason why I didn't take him is because I don't know that offensive line is going to be any better. Like, you clean house with your offensive line, 5 new starters, you have a new offensive line coach. That's not ideal. Shehan Jayaraja, our guy from CBS Sports, did a great breakdown of, like, offensive line continuity, how it could impact Colorado. Really interesting read if you have the time. But there are things about him that you go, dang, that's really impressive with what he did last year. He had 3 picks and 430 passing attempts. He had a 27-3 TD to INT ratio. He was top 25 in quarterback rating. The adjusted rushing yards tell a different story of his ability to move. But when he escapes pressure and he is able to attack downfield, even though some of the mechanics aren't necessarily there, the guy does special things, okay? Yeah. He definitely does. But it's all the other stuff, man. It's all the other stuff. If you're an elite leader, you got to have some discipline. And some of the things that you see, like the comment of a guy that, look, is coming off of a 4-8 season. And that story that came out in The Athletic where you got a former player that's speaking out about, like, the treatment of Dion and stuff like that. And Shedeur's saying, like, oh, like, I don't even remember you. You must have been mid at best. Like, what are we doing?
Right.
what are we doing? Like, that's the type of stuff that you can criticize a player for who is entering his fourth year of college. I would have had no problem if you had taken him. He's more and more becoming a guy that I would have some serious reservations about.
I'll say this, and this is why I just didn't have him on my board. It's this simple. You could take all that stuff, put it in a box, whatever. Every quarterback is a hit away from being out for the season. And if you're going to take that many hits, the odds are better than not that you're going to miss time. I mean, it's a Herculean. I mean, if you want to be an NFL team and draft this guy, the best thing on his resume is that he's still walking around. Okay. So I don't know if you can put together 2 years like that. I don't know. I mean, it's like we've all played fantasy football and drafted a first rounder that gets hurt and you're just dead in the water. That's exactly how I'd feel if I drafted him at any point in this draft, because could have a guy just not accumulating stats. And that could happen to any quarterback. I understand that. But it's like he's begging for it with the stuff he says, the way he celebrates, as bad as his offensive line is, the fact that Deion's his dad and people could settle personal scores that way, which is kind of messed up. But yeah, I just didn't want to draft him because I don't think he's going to stay healthy this season.
It's a good point. It's like he gets entire defenses that just want to take his head off.
Yeah.
Because of the way that, if you're going to talk like that and you're going to be this guy that's, you're showing your watches and stuff like that comes with the territory.
Yeah.
Like it's just a different conversation. So I know people are probably going to hate on him as an omission here, but look, it's a really, really deep group. The other honorable mentions that I had, Cam Ward, but the Miami thing always makes me worried.
He was off the list too. Easy.
Yeah. If he had gone to Ohio State, he's making my board, but
yep.
Miami, I had Howard and Nuss as, honorable mention here, already off the board. But then I had Wigman. Miller Moss is really interesting. I like him from a Heisman bet standpoint. I think his odds are 40-1 right now. Mm-hmm. A Lincoln Riley quarterback looks like he's going to win that job. Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma, somebody that I think we're going to be talking about a lot more this season, somebody that we've talked about a little bit so far, that has a great group of receivers to be able to work with. Caden Salter, the Liberty quarterback, mm-hmm. that everybody thought was going to hit the portal. He didn't. Jordan McLeod going to Texas State from James Madison was an interesting one. I think a lot of people thought he would go to a bigger school, but a really nice situation at Texas State. And then how about Will Rogers at Washington? We just talked about Jed Fish working with Noah Fafita. I'm just saying. We talked about all the great things that they did together. Will Rogers in the right system is a really good quarterback, and he could put up huge, huge numbers this year at Washington and wouldn't necessarily be a surprise. Anybody else that came to mind in that group?
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much hit on, Jalon Daniels at Kansas.
That's a good one. I should have had him on here.
But he's another guy that can't stay healthy. So, that's my thing is, they played so many games with their backup quarterback. I think isn't Bean. And, that's kind of it for me. It's I don't want you to not accrue stats unless you're Jaden Daniels or something. Unless you're just not Jalon Daniels, but unless you're just so good that you can miss 2 games and have 40 touchdowns, which is really hard.
Yeah. Probably DJ Uyunglele is another guy that people will probably have on a list like this, but
I don't know why.
Yeah, look, some of the upside stuff about him, like why are you betting on him to win a Heisman at this point? I'd kind of push back on a little bit, but yeah, quarterback is crazy, crazy deep. All right, let's before we go to Pitch Me, let's take a quick break to talk about our YouTube channel. If you are watching this on YouTube, thank you. Saturday Down South YouTube channel has all of our episodes. We've got all of our episodes, all of our interviews. We have clips that we're putting up there if you're into the shorts, which is basically like TikTok on YouTube. And we have so much great content that is coming down on the Saturday Down South YouTube channel. You should subscribe. You should do it right now. If you're one of those people that like a little background noise at work, but you don't want to be seen kind of like plugging it, with your headphones into your phone or something weird like that, or you just want to be able to have that video. And you want to be able to look at us while we do this, because Will and I make funny faces, and sometimes we wear topical t-shirts or jerseys or whatever it is. Saturday Down South YouTube channel. You should subscribe right now. All right, Will, pitch me SEC quarterbacks for 2024. Look, I know we've talked a lot about quarterbacks today, and so I think have an idea of which way we would lean, but this is the official quarterback of the Saturday Down South podcast from the SEC for 2024. Mm-hmm. We have to disclose biases. Your bias, obviously,
you're the man of literature. You tell me, man. Biases?
Sure. Why not? Look, I don't fancy myself a man of literature in the way that some others do, but I read a book every once in a while, as you can see from the background. Mm-hmm. Garrett Nussmeier, he is
we have to disclose this, okay? We have to report this to customs.
Mm-hmm.
Garrett Nussmeier cannot be your official quarterback of the SEC for 2024. We will have a Garrett Nussmeier pitch. We have 5 pitches that we are going to get to in a bit here. And if you don't hear a pitch for one of your guys, like we don't have a pitch that we really were crazy about for Jackson Dart, we don't have one for Quinn Ewers.
And you know what? We say this every week, guys. You know, everybody does the whole SDS doesn't talk about my guy. What about my guy? You're sleeping on him. Well, guess what? We have a segment every week where you can talk about your guy and we will listen. So don't get out there and be like, well, you guys aren't talking about Jackson Dart. No, you guys aren't talking about Jackson Dart. We would love to talk about him, actually.
Already talked about him, too.
Yeah.
On this show. We'd love to talk about him even more. But
and maybe if you guys had pitched him, I would have drafted him before Will Howard. But alas, I was not convinced.
This is true. Hey, Lane, I know you're listening. Give us a pitch. Tell us why your guy is the best quarterback in the SEC in 2024, the ultimate vibes guy. I think that's how we need to be able to kind of sort this out. It's not to say that we're going to defend everything that this quarterback does necessarily in 2024, but an official quarterback of the Saturday Down South podcast for 2024.
We're buying the stonk. We're investing. We're getting in ground floor.
We are investing. Okay. So we got 5 pitches. Let's start with the Saturday Down South Instagram. Oh, how about that? Let's start with Nuss. Kristen Kissinger says, this is going to sound completely biased, but I think it's going to be Nuss. Not only can he sling it, he will be behind the best offensive line in the country, has weapons everywhere. His stats are going to be unreal because the defense might be improved, but I'm not sure by how much. Hashtag Nussbus, hashtag Go Tigers. If Garrett Nussmeier leads the SEC in touchdown passes, it won't be a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
If he leads the SEC in interceptions, it also won't be a surprise.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely like, you know, we try to not use the word gunslinger because, like, if you think about it, man, those guys are actually kind of going out of style. Like the old Brett Favre, who would have a ton of interceptions, but a ton of touchdowns, completion percentage in the 50s, but every throw was electric. Those guys are getting schemed out of the games. And most coaches would rather have a guy who runs the system and makes the safe play or throws it away than a guy who's going to test the defense downfield. And I think that just like Jaden Daniels was coming out of Arizona State, you know, the Sickos committee had this metric that was like fun rating, where he had a lot of deep touchdowns, but he also had a lot of picks. Like Nussmeier's right there. So hopefully, you know, the staff can coach that out of him. But you're right. He is an old school gunslinger.
You know who was that guy last year? And a different player, very different skill set. I'm not saying that these 2 guys are the exact same, but just in terms of the guy that can make highlight reel plays, and then also those interceptions were just like, oh my God, those are so unbelievably bad. Could have those grenade games. Was Haynes King.
Yeah.
Haynes King is kind of in that category. And I don't know that I think he qualifies as a gunslinger. I think he's not quite the gunslinger from a traditional standpoint because he's more mobile than I think like beyond the line of scrimmage. Brett Favre is the guy that when I close my eyes and think of that term gunslinger, I think of a guy that just wants to chuck it, and by all means, he's going to find a way to throw the football by any means necessary and try and make that type of play. But Haynes King was kind of that guy where, look, I don't think anybody in college football had more interceptions than Haynes King last year, but he ended up having like 35 touchdowns for Georgia Tech. So look, we need those guys. We need those guys in the sport where no matter what, they're just going to be able to make something happen. Nuss is going to make it happen. No, that's the thing that I have very much confidence in. I don't know that he's going to be the best quarterback in the SEC, but his stats are going to be
27 touchdowns, 16 interceptions. That is like a mid-2000s Big 12 quarterback stat line. I could imagine that photo of him, the Miami game, where he's like covered in grass. He's like chucking the ball backwards. That was sick, man.
He had 10 rushing touchdowns too, I want to say. He ended up with like 37 touchdowns last year.
Total. Crazy. I see what you're saying. Yeah, he had, somehow ESPN stats are terrible. But yes, I believe you.
Yeah. You just got to click on the stats thing, and then you scroll down, and it shows rushing there. Yeah.
Fair. Yes. 10 is, you nailed that. So
yeah,
see, I just trusted you. That's
what
it was.
Just trust me when I know that, you know, a guy like that is 150 to 1 to win the Heisman. You know, just saying, little dart throw. Just never know. Haynes King. I'm never quitting Haynes King. If we got a pitch for Haynes King today, even though he's a Georgia Tech and he's not in the SEC, they're like, oh, we got to hear it out.
Auburn, Should have grabbed Hayes' kick. Anyway, so point being, I'll say this too. Like, to answer your question about the touchdowns, like leading the SEC in touchdowns, and that's why I love to have like this conversation or like on the same week, so we can get everybody else's thoughts too on these quarterbacks. Because as I'm thinking about this with Brian Kelly and that great offensive line, I think they're going to be a lot more likely to kind of do like the brotherly shove at the goal line and just lean forward on the defense, rather than give the ball to Nussmeier, who might do a little bit of Russell Wilson Super Bowl action where he turns a slant to a touchdown the other way. So I think that's the only thing that could prevent him from kind of being in that conversation, is that once they get inside the red zone, Jaden Daniels had that mobility to him, you know what I'm saying? Whereas it's going to be a little bit more of a safe bet, I think, under Brian Kelly to just punch it in.
Yeah, definitely think that path is there. Again, can he be the 2024 version of Carson Beck? I think that's, a fair question to be able to ask about his game. All right, another one from Saturday Down South Instagram. This one's from Caleb Creed. Caleb says, Brady Cook, best receiving rotation in the SEC, and it's really not close.
All right, man.
Anytime anybody says it's really not close, it's always close.
It's always close.
100%. Killed the portal to restore the O-line and got another dynamic dual threat running back in the portal who's going to tear the SEC up. Let him cook. Brady Cook having the best group of pass catchers in the SEC, and it's not close. If he had just left it there and then said not close, that's a better pitch. Caleb, Ole Miss, look up and down that Ole Miss receiving room and tell me that Trey Harris and Juice Wells and Caden Prieskorn and Jordan Watkins, tell me that those guys don't at least stack up to Mizzou. All you had to do was just leave it there, but instead you said it's not close. That probably hurts this pitch a little bit. He's right, though. I mean, like we just talked about with Nuss, the surrounding pieces with Brady Cook are very advantageous. Didn't even bring up Kirby Moore, a certain coordinator who went 1-1 in the SEC OC draft. Brady Cook cooking a little bit more, even with a nickname that, again, I'm not crazy about. I think that there's better out there. It is certainly realistic that he ends up as an all-SEC quarterback at season's end.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've talked about it, like seeing him kind of mature in the offense, seeing him really take a true leadership role, after Schrader's departure. I think the sky is kind of the limit for him in terms of, what Mizzou can do. And they kind of showed that last year. And in terms of the top end, right? Like I said, I'm not crazy about betting on it. And they feel like a team that has a lot of outcomes just because they just historically, like I say, even the Florida game this year was just like, could have lost at the end. Like, so point being, but I will echo your point of like, hey, you almost had us with this pitch, but don't give me that it's not close, because as much as I love that boy Weiss, we sing his praises all day. And Burton, I mean, probably, would you say Burton's the best receiver coming back in the SEC this year? Like he's 1-1?
Yes, he is the best receiver coming back in the SEC. When I fill out all SEC ballot, he will be on it. Trey Harris will be on it as well. If Trey Harris plays a full season for Ole Miss last year, I think we're talking about him as a preseason All-American. I truly do. And the catches that guy made were absolutely ridiculous, but he will definitely be preseason first team. He might be that AP slot for, we like to do that. If a receiver is basically not 6'3", a receiver that's, gets thrown at that AP
what
spot.
What if they were a punt returner or a running back, though? Like, what about them? You can play with the flicks in real life.
What if he's had a carry in his career? Can we throw him on the AP slot? Like Christian McCaffrey gets that all the time. It's like, oh, because he's a running back who catches passes. Right. I get it. Like he's part of the return game as well. So yeah, whatever. But still, he's an extraordinary running back. Luther Burden III, extraordinary receiver, best returning receiver in the SEC. Let's go to this one from Grant Haney. This might be our best pitch. This is really good, from the Saturday Down South podcast Facebook group. Grant says, the best QB heading into the upcoming season is the reigning, defending, 4th and 31 proven SEC champion, Jalen Milroe. Love it, man. Along with a slew of returning wide receivers, the emergence of potential future All Bang the Drum team member Jeremy Bernard provides Milroe with a formidable threat of pass-catching receivers to give SEC secondaries and DCs fits, not to mention the pass-catching options that Jam Miller provided glimpses of in the aforementioned game last year in Atlanta against the Pups from Athens. Whew, great. Going for it, man. All of this, and oh, by the way, are you aware of the ground game capabilities he provides the Tide? If you need a reminder, just go back and rewatch 3rd and 15 against Arkansas, circa 2022, when Milroe ripped the heart out of the Fayetteville faithful and torched Tusk for 75 yards in a then 28-23 game. A game that Arkansas was very much climbing back in after Bryce Young went down. For an entertaining touch, as mentioned on last week's podcast, just wait for him to stare into the camera. And as Kiffin so poetically put it, get your popcorn ready. Pretty good, Will. Did he convert you?
This is a pitch Hall of Fame. I feel the acid reflux welling up in the back of my throat as I've already been incredibly nice to Jalen Moreau today, but I think this even puts it farther. I mean, this is exactly what we look for in a pitch, right? It's because when you really get going and you really have a lot of facts, a lot of data points, you can flex on your rivals. Like, you're making the point, which is that, in the big game, he beat Georgia. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So, yeah, I think that I'm starting to come around on Moreau as like an S-tier quarterback. I don't know if you ever heard that verbiage. It's from the online gaming community, but it's like you're at the very top. It's above A. I think that he could be that, especially, given the OC. But like we talked about, he's got that dog in him. So that's good. He's got, that's the pro column. He's got the, he's mobile, and his passing game is with one of the smartest offensive minds in football. So yeah, I really am buying Milroe stock this year.
If you're down on Milroe, ask yourself why. Is it because... Yeah, I'm not saying specifically to you. I'm just saying,
right. I'm agreeing with you. Yeah,
I think there are people who don't think he's one of the 6 or 7 best quarterbacks returning in college football, and I'm just like, what? Like, did you think that the games that he was playing in, he was holding Alabama back? Because that wasn't the team that I watched last year. He was pushing them forward,
right.
And even with my guy out of spring camp, Ty Simpson wasn't pulling that Alabama team out of the rut that they were in early on. And Jalen Milroe did. And he deserves immense credit for that. You can have questions, of course, as we already addressed. Like, there are things with his game that he has admitted he wants to be able to improve, and things that he can continue to do better, the pocket presence, all those things as well that we talk about being important. But Jalen Milroe is phenomenal. He is absolutely phenomenal. And he is very worthy of a pitch for SEC's best quarterback in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the rare, like I said, I don't understand why Bama fans are so good at these pitches. Maybe they have lots of armor, they have lots of reps. But yeah, I said, you guys are absolutely crushing these pitches. And then he goes, like Kevin Malone in his world famous chili, it's what we do best. I agree. I feel like as much as I want to go in and be like, I don't know, the last couple of these, we've talked about the Bama uniforms, we've talked about Jalen Milroe. I'm seeing the light a little bit. These guys are swaying me, I'll be honest.
It's hard to argue with the team that has won, just absurd amounts of football games over the course of the last 17 years. So who knows if the pitches will continue, if there's any sort of dip in a post-Nick Saban world. But for now, yes, the pitches are indeed very good. This one's also good. Michael Dark says, Carson Beck drives a Lamborghini truck, handsome, has that dog in him. That's dog with A-W-G, of course. Averaged 10 yards per attempt in his first year as a starter. Owns the SEC record for consecutive 250 passing yard games to start a career with 11, and his Snapchat game is legendary. I'll leave that last one alone.
We don't know. We never know about the hits, only the misses in the Snapchat game. I just want to put that out there. Everybody wants to jump on KJ Jefferson, Will Rogers, whatever. Okay, but you don't know their hit rate. I'm just going to say that. Leave these kids alone. They're having fun.
The hits don't make it viral. They just don't. They never do. Driving a Lamborghini truck, yeah, that's pretty sick. Not gonna lie. Saw one of those the other day as I'm like pulling out of daycare. Saw somebody rolling in a Lamborghini truck, and I thought to myself, okay, they got that dog in them. I don't really push back on that. It definitely helps your case. Like the efficiency as Michael outlined here, 9.5. We'll round up and say 10 yards per attempt. First year as a starter. I just question if there is as high of a statistical season as there is for other guys in this group. That's the only thing that I would probably push back on, saying like undoubtedly he's the best quarterback in the SEC coming back or by season's end, if we're saying that, even though, again, I just took the guy 1-1. So clearly I'm on board with this take. I have no issue with it whatsoever. I forgot the part about the Lamborghini truck. I couldn't have taken him higher than 1-1, but that might have helped.
Yeah, I think that, and we said this a little bit, but for Beck, it's almost like you should just sim to the end of the season because I don't think he's going to be like a 50 touchdowns guy. And that's not what Kirby's trying to do anyway, right? I mean, even like Stetson Bennett and stuff was not doing that. So I think it's about, the SEC championship game and whatever form that's going to take this year. We don't know if it's going to be like a Texas thing. We don't know who's going to be in that for the first time in like a long time, not only because of the new format, but because of Nick Saban retiring. new teams, whatever. So point being, like, I think that that's his one little thing he still has to do is have that type of signature performance in that type of game. I mean, this is his first year as a starter, so we saw all of them back to back. It wasn't like he had a Jalen Miller game like we were just talking about. We like came in as a backup and I go do something. So I'm not holding that against him. I'm just saying, like, I'm trying to really go back and say what was the big game that he like really balled out for. And
Tennessee, he balled
out.
Yeah. And especially after you have the 75-yard touchdown to start the game, and then like that place is rocking. It's crazy. You don't have Brock available for that one, and if you're gonna show up, like that's the time to do it. And he was awesome. I'm pretty sure that's right after that game was when I gave my Bobo apology.
Yeah,
so,
I just like this isn't last year's Tennessee. Like they lost to Florida. Like
what a great defense, a great Tennessee defense though. Still, that he looked just carved up.
It's just in terms of like we know that Georgia has all this talent, so like you gotta see teams that are as talented as you and be better than them is my thing, because it's like Tennessee is a fine team. I'm not dumping on them, but they're now getting to a point with Amaleava where like they're really starting to get their guys together, whereas Georgia has like years and years and years of continuity at this point. So yeah, I think that I mean, FSU, I guess, but that doesn't really count either for obvious reasons. So like that's the thing.
Great.
We haven't had like the the big time like Joe Burrow Oklahoma game out of him where it's just like, no, you're getting smoked. Like, yeah, it's not a great defense, 63 points. Like, like that's where I'm going with that.
Yeah, he needs more games against league competition that go down to the wire, and
or
like we talked about
that he smacks them from wire to wire as well. I will accept that answer.
Florida State, Tennessee might have been a little bit of that as well. But yeah, it's crazy to think that Beck could improve even more, but I definitely think he can. Mm-hmm. Let's end with this one from Cameron Jalufka. We got it covered. Cameron says, Connor Wigman has looked great even with a terrible offensive line. That got Wigman, Johnson, and Henderson all injured. Yep. Colin Klein and an updated tempo offense will do wonders for a third-year player. That said, backups have proved more than serviceable. Watch out for the Aggies this season. Connor Wigman's the forgotten guy. He's the forgotten guy because he hasn't played a full season as a starter. So I get it from that standpoint. I think everybody who listens to this knows my feelings on him and how I thought he was doing so much better than what national people were saying when he got hurt, because he got off to a bad start in that Auburn game. They weren't moving the ball. And then they lost the Miami game, a game that they would have lost that game by 35 if he hadn't been really good in the vast majority of it. I love how he handles pressure. I think he's among the best in the country in terms of handling pressure and not necessarily taking that sack, but being able to step up and make that big time throw or move the chains. You can't play man coverage on him and third down and just turn around and pretend he's not going to run on you. He can absolutely do that. And I think that there is a very quiet confidence with Connor Wigman for a program that, could have gone out into the portal and said, let's go find our guy. We've got a new staff coming on board. We want to do things a little bit differently. You're a Jimbo guy. We want to bring in our own. They didn't do that. They didn't do that because they like Connor Wigman. And I do think he will work wonders with Colin Klein. Does he have enough help on that offensive line? As Cameron just outlined in the pitch, that's kind of the big question. It's amazing that offensive line was so bad last year and has no reason to be as bad as it possibly was. But yeah, it could be a guy that maybe if we do this at season's end, like Connor Wigman's part of that conversation. It's not crazy to think of him being that good.
When you went off script and were like, "Oh, I'm going to draft someone you're not expecting," I thought you were going to say him. And honestly, one of us might regret that because we love what they're building over there. I think that has been in a very weird situation, and one of the worst situations you could be in over the course of his career, which is like, think like D'Angelo Russell, right? Where it's like, I got drafted to the Lakers. I'm playing with Kobe. I have a Lakers jersey on. All these fans are watching me, but this is not the Lakers. Yeah, this is like, I have the expectations of all this money and all this glitz and glam and all this, but I don't really have the people, the Jimmys and Joes, to do it. And I think that's kind of been his whole career at A&M. It's that, he signed up to play with all this great talent, to be part of this machine, to kind of be the spearhead of like the Jimbo Fisher championship season that he was promising. And it just never really came together for him. But I don't think that's worth holding against him because unfortunately, he's been put in these weird, bad situations. Like thinking about like the South Carolina game where you're just like, what are you supposed to do there? Like your whole team has no idea what's going on. Jimbo's looking at his Times New Roman lowercase hoodie. Like it's just so point being like, I'm optimistic. I love that this is a pitch, because and again, we're talking about like people are going to say, "Oh, you're so hard on Carson Beck." The expectations are different, right? Like we're not talking about an A&M team that should be competing for the SEC. If they are, then we're having a totally different conversation about Connor Wigman. But that's why to whom much is given, much is tested. So he could be the one who brings them to glory. I'm not going to say back to glory because what was the glory, right? Like, so he could be the one. He's the one that brings them to glory in the SEC. And that would be nice. But I don't think that I think he would be, because of how his career is timed out, kind of a stepping stone anyway. So I think in that role, I really, really, really like him to kind of set the table to show what this new offense can do.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that, God, you go through it and you think to yourself, are there 10 guys with all SEC upside going into the season? That feels too much. I need to narrow that list down. And then you kind of get into Nuss and Nico and you get into Arnold and you're like, oh yeah, there might just be. And Wigman is the forgotten guy because he's in an atypical situation with a new staff, but a staff that should be able to get the best out of him. And I thought that staff last year with Petrino on board with whatever control he had of the offense was getting the best out of him. I like that pitch was realistic too.
Yeah.
I like that we laid out, okay, like that's your guy. Here are his flaws. That's a pitch we need to pin and come back to. I don't think right now it's good enough to win, but I think it's one to at least be able to say, put a pin in. I told you here, if this is the way that this sets up, there is a path for him to be the guy at season's end. So I like that, but I think Grant Haney wins here. No doubt, right? Like that pitch, the Jalen Milroe pitch was darn good.
I think it was. And I think, like I said, I just don't want to come up as anti-Carson Beck. I think that was a great pitch as well. I didn't know Lamborghini trucks existed. I think that's right.
They're sick.
They're sick. I love that. Like this,
better than the Tesla truck. Way better.
Yeah. And I think it's in that order in terms of like sked. Like I said, I can't talk about Nuss, obviously, but like for me, it's Milroe 1, the pitches, Beck 2, and then 3, it would be the Wigman one because I like that one a lot. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that doing the Ric Flair intro where you're like, he beat this team and this team and this team. It's like, that's what I'm talking about. Where it's kind of like going back into like the Bill O'Brien days where I was the one, saying this team isn't that good. Like something's up here. And then that all kind of reared its head last year in the Michigan game. Now, not before that, because he was able to pull them up by their bootstraps and be like, why are you the way that you are? But it's like, it's I haven't even thought about comparing last year's Bama team to the Bill O'Brien teams where the cracks started to show. But yeah, I mean, even then, they're in these dogfights with Arkansas and he's coming back and winning the game again, kind of put himself in that position, but that's growing pains. So yeah, I'm fascinated to see like this maybe a little more rebuild than I thought it was for DeBoer. Like he actually I'm giving him credit. Like I don't think it's this turnkey situation everybody thinks it is.
So Milroe he ends up being the 6th quarterback off the board in our draft, but he is now the official
quarterback. Yes.
Official quarterback of the Saturday Down South podcast for the 2024 season. I promise I will not do the same sign off that he does every single time. I won't even imitate it because it's so good. And so it's so genuine. I love when Jalen Milroe's in front of a camera. Sorry. So yes.
Yeah. Like you guys know, I'll obviously dump on Bama players all day, but he is is he my favorite Bama player ever? I like Gibbs a lot. I really like Julio Jones.
Gibbs was nasty, man.
God,
I love Jahmyr Gibbs.
I liked Henry too. I mean, gosh, that's hard to beat. But I think Milroe is my favorite Bama player because he was so humble. He is so humble. I mean, and when you hear him talk, he just has this joy about him. That's what I really like about it. It's like, I feel like I could sit down and talk to him for like an hour and we would both have a good time. And it wouldn't be like, oh, I got somewhere to be, I'm bigger than this. It's like, he just seems so cool and genuine. And whenever where you did like the, hey coach, like that was so cool.
Yeah. That was like my favorite moment of the draft. It was adorable. It was just so unbelievably wholesome.
I think that's why he's so cool and likable is that you see him and he's swole. He looks like he's built like a fire hydrant. We're talking about the legs, the neck, like he's just shredded. And then you hear him talk and he's just so cool, humble. It's like you think he would sound like the guy from Blue Lilo and Stitch, like the big manta ray guy. It's like, hello, good to meet you. And he's like, hey man, how's it going? You're like, hell yeah, Jalen, let's go.
Yeah, I'm about to go power clean 500 pounds, but hey, what's up, man? How you doing?
I'll give you a hug after. He's cool, man. He's real cool.
Seriously. All right, I think that'll do it. That's a lot of good quarterback discussion for today. Don't say we talk about quarterbacks enough. We definitely got our money's worth here today.
We hit on almost everybody in the SEC. I think I'm not to be mean, don't really know what Andy's got going on. Peyton Thorne we didn't talk about. Pretty much everyone else we kind of like got around to it a roundabout way.
Not a lot of Graham Mertz talk. Not a lot of Graham Mertz talk. Florida fans might be a little bit upset with that. Not too much Jackson Arnold talk, but I feel like I talked about him a decent amount.
You could
a few weeks
again
ago.
sway me to think that Graham Mertz was ready for a breakout year. Nobody did. So what am I supposed to do? Just naturally look up Florida highlights? Come on.
Pitch us, Florida fans. Pitch us. That's what we're here for. Please do that. Follow us on Instagram, Saturday Down South Podcast on Facebook. Leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South Podcast. Follow us on the app formerly known as Twitter, at the SDS Pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.